The Kingdom of Bulgaria participated in World War I on the side of the Central Powers from 14 October 1915, when the country declared war on Serbia, until 30 September 1918, when the Armistice of Thessalonica was signed and came into effect. In the aftermath of the Balkan Wars, Bulgaria found itself isolated on the international scene, surrounded by hostile neighbors and deprived of the support of the great powers. Anti-Bulgarian sentiments were especially strong in France and Russia, whose political circles blamed the country for the dissolution of the Balkan League. This and the failure of Bulgarian foreign policy turned revanchism in a focal point for the country's external relations. When the First World War erupted in August 1914, Bulgaria was still recovering from the negative economic and demographic impact of the recent wars, and avoided direct involvement in the new conflict by declaring neutrality. The strategic geographic location and strong military made the country a desired ally by both warring sides, but Bulgarian aspirations were difficult to satisfy because they included territorial claims against 4 Balkan countries. As the war progressed, the Central Powers found themselves in a better position to fulfill Bulgarian demands and persuaded the country to join their cause in September 1915. Despite being the smallest member of the alliance in area and population, Bulgaria made vital contributions to the common war effort. Its entry to the war was the death knell to Serbia and Romania, and ensured the continuous Ottoman war effort by opening the way for much-needed German material assistance. Despite that, initially the war was characterized with highly successful campaigns of rapid movements in 1915 and 1916. Once most Bulgarian territorial aspirations had been satisfied, it degraded into a state of trench attrition on both the northern and the southern front. This prolonged period substantially weakened the economy, created various supply problems, and reduced the health and morale of the troops on the front lines. Under these circumstances, the Allied armies in Greece, composed of contingents from almost all Entente countries, managed to break the Macedonian front and cause the rapid collapse of part of the Bulgarian army, which took the form of an open military rebellion and proclamation of a republic by the rebellious troops at Radomir. Bulgaria was forced to seek and accept an armistice on 30 September 1918. For a second time in half a decade, the country had been led to a national catastrophe for which Tsar Ferdinand I assumed responsibility, abdicated and left Bulgaria to his heir on 3 October 1918. The formal conclusion of Bulgaria's participation in World War I was marked by the signing of the Treaty of Neuilly in 1919, according to which the country had to return all occupied territories, cede even more of its land, and pay heavy reparations. Background: the Balkan Wars. When Bulgaria proclaimed its independence from the Ottoman Empire on the 22nd of September 1908, its status was promoted to that of a kingdom, and as Ferdinand I assumed the title of Tsar, the country was now able to focus on completing its national unification by turning its attention towards the lands populated by Bulgarians that remained under Ottoman control. To achieve its goals, the Bulgarian government, under Prime Minister Gishov, approached the governments of the other Balkan countries hoping to create an alliance directed against the Ottomans. His efforts culminated in a series of bilateral treaties concluded in 1912 and the formation of the Balkan League. By summer of the same year, Ottoman grip on their Balkan provinces had deteriorated rapidly in Albania and Macedonia, where an open rebellion had erupted. The Allies decided to use the vulnerable state of the Ottoman Empire and declared war on it in October 1912. The opening stages of the First Balkan War began with decisive Allied victories in both Thrace and Macedonia. Within a month, the Ottomans found themselves driven back by the Bulgarians to within 40 kilometers from Constantinople and badly beaten by the Serbians and the Greeks. A relatively short armistice brought no conclusion to the conflict, and fighting once again broke out in January 1913. A major Ottoman counter-offensive was defeated by the Bulgarians, who also seized the fortress of Adrianople in March and finally forced the Ottoman Empire to admit defeat and return to the peace table. While the Bulgarian army was still fighting, a new challenge arose from the north. Romania demanded territorial compensations from Bulgaria for its neutrality during the war. A conference, which was held in St. Petersburg, sought to resolve the dispute by rewarding Romania the Bulgarian town of Silistra, but this decision greatly antagonized both countries and sowed the seed of further enmity between them. The formal ending of the war was marked by the signing of the London Peace Treaty, which bestowed to the Allies all Ottoman territory to the west of the Mydrianos line, with the exception of Albania. The treaty failed to divide the territories between the victors and brought about the dissolution of the Balkan League. Foreseeing the outcome of these events and the collapse of all his efforts, Guishov resigned from his post and was replaced by the hardliner Stoyan Danev. The new government was not willing to compromise with Bulgarian claims in Macedonia. Neither were Serbia and Greece, whose interests were frustrated by the creation of an Albanian state. Russia, which was viewed as the patron of the Balkan League, was unable to control the situation and settled the disputes between the Allies. The failure of Russian diplomacy, and the Entente which stood behind it, was a victory for Austria-Hungary, which sought to undermine the unity between the Balkan countries. In June, the new Bulgarian government was asked by the Bulgarian General Staff to either take aggressive action or order demobilization within 10 days. The senior Bulgarian commanders were concerned by the new alliance between Serbia and Greece, and the growing restlessness in the army, which had been in the field since September 1912. Danev was preparing to leave for Russia, where a new attempt to solve the problem was to make Tsar Ferdinand, and General Saviv decided to make a demonstration to Serbia, Greece and the Entente diplomacy by ordering 2 of the Bulgarian armies to attack and consolidate their positions in Macedonia on the 16th of June. More than a day later, Danev ordered Saviv to stop the fighting, and the latter obeyed, despite orders for the continuation of the attack given to him by the Tsar. The Serbians and Greeks, however, were not willing to miss this opportunity and declared war on Bulgaria. Perceiving an opportunity to acquire southern Dobruja, Romania also invaded Bulgaria, meeting virtually no resistance, and was soon followed by the Ottoman Empire, which restored its control over eastern Thrace. The eruption of the Second Balkan War tore a rift in the relations between Bulgaria and Russia and led to the downfall of the Danev government amidst the news of Bulgarian defeats in the field. A new liberal coalition government under vassal Radoslavov took control and immediately began seeking a diplomatic solution to the developing crisis, looking primarily towards Germany and Austria-Hungary for help. Direct negotiations with Serbia and Greece proved inconclusive, but following Bulgaria's offer to cede southern Dobruja to Romania, both sides agreed to begin peace talks in Bucharest. At the same time, the Bulgarian army managed to stabilize the Serbian and Greek fronts and even go on the offensive, threatening to completely encircle the Greek army, but with the Romanians only a few kilometers from Sofia and the Ottomans in good position to invade the whole of southeastern Bulgaria. The warring countries concluded an armistice on 31 July 1913. Following the cessation of hostilities, the peace talks in Bucharest resumed. The Bulgarian delegation found itself in almost complete isolation, with only the partial and faint support of Russia and Austria-Hungary, which forced it to accept the dictate-like conditions of its opponents and sign the Treaty of Bucharest. According to it, besides ceding southern Dobruja, Bulgaria also had to give up most of Macedonia, including the uncontested zone that had previously been bestowed to it by the 1912 treaty between Bulgaria and Serbia, and the town of Kavala. Its territory was increased by about 16% and its population by only 8%. The peace treaty with the Ottomans had to be dealt on a bilateral basis. Initially, the Bulgarian diplomacy maintained the position that the question about the possession of Adrianople and Eastern Thrace was an international matter resolved with the London Peace Treaty, but this line soon had to be abandoned due to the lack of support by the great powers and their unwillingness to pressure the Ottoman Empire. The resulting Treaty of Constantinople restored to the Ottomans most of the lands they had reoccupied during the Second Balkan War. During the talks, the Radoslavov government for the first time sought to recover and strengthen the relations with the Ottomans by discussing an alliance directed against Serbia and Greece, but no concrete results were achieved at that point. Bulgaria. In the aftermath of the Balkan Wars, the outcome of the Second Balkan War negated almost all of the gains made by Bulgaria during the First Balkan War. What was left was far outweighed by the losses of the wars. The failed national unification led to a massive influx of over 120,000 Bulgarian refugees from Eastern Thrace and the parts of Macedonia that remained under Serbian and Greek rule. The Radoslavov government faced the uneasy task of integrating the new population and the acquired territories, as well as rebuilding the economy and the military potential of the country. Internal bickering within the People's Liberal Party and the lack of a majority in parliament forced the dissolution of the legislative body. General election were called for the pre-war borders of Bulgaria in November 1913 and held for the first time under nationwide proportional representation. The government parties gained only 97 seats as compared to the 107 seats of their opponents, which prompted a new resignation of the government in December. Tsar Ferdinand held consultations with several important politicians, but once again preferred to appoint a government with Radoslavov as prime minister and dissolved the newly elected parliament. When the next elections were held in March 1914, the population of the new territories was allowed to participate despite many people not receiving Bulgarian citizenship yet. During the campaign, the spokesmen of opposition parties were practically prevented from campaigning in these lands on the grounds of the alleged threat to their safety. Ottoman officials, however, were allowed to visit the local Muslim population and urge it to vote for the government. Despite these and other extreme measures, the Liberal parties gained 116 seats, as many as their opponents, which were increased with another 16 following the completion of the verification process. The government was finally able to focus its attention to more pressing internal and external matters. Radoslavov, however, remained handicapped by this fragile majority and was often forced to compromise with his coalition partners, falsify election results or simply neglect parliament. Economic situation. Bulgarian participation in the Balkan Wars disrupted the upward trend in the Bulgarian economy and proved crippling for public finances, with the financial cost of the war against the Ottoman Empire alone at over 1.3 billion francs. Agriculture, which was the leading sector of the economy, was badly affected, and overall production was reduced by about 9% compared to 1911. Still, the country avoided a large food crisis. Thousands of peasant workers engaged in agricultural activities became casualties during the wars. The number of available horses, sheep, cattle and livestock in general was between 20% and 40% lower. The single most damaging event was the loss of southern Dobrudia. It had accounted for 20% of Bulgarian grain production before the wars and had the largest and most developed Bulgarian farming communities. This, combined with the bad weather, held the harvest of all crops to 79% of the pre-war level in 1914. Unlike the agriculture, Bulgarian industry was less affected, even though problems occurred due to its complete dependence on foreign imports of machinery and spare parts. Production registered a modest decline and was able to maintain constant level of capital investment, which led to recovery of the sector as early as 1914. External trade fell drastically in 1913, with exports reduced by 40% and imports by 11%, which led to a soaring trade deficit of over 87 million lefs. By 1914, before the war, grain had been a leading Bulgarian export commodity, with the most productive area being Dobrudja. The state took special care for the development of the region. It built railways to carry grain and other exports to the port of Varna, whose facilities had been developed at great cost. In 1912 it handled more goods than Salonika. Following the Second Balkan War, these advantages were lost because the port was deprived of its hinterland, and the Romanian border now ran only 15 kilometers away. The new lands gained in the south were mountainous and much poorer. They provided an outlet to the Aegean Sea at the port of Dedigac. The railway to it passed through Ottoman territory. Still, Western Thrace in particular was famed with the production of high-quality tobacco that proved to be a valuable asset. Foreign policy dealing with the international isolation that had befallen Bulgaria was a major priority of the Radoslavov government. This included the re-establishing of diplomatic relations with Bulgaria's neighbors, which was soon achieved. First with the Ottoman Empire in September 1913, then with Serbia in December of the same year, and finally with Greece in March 1914. Nevertheless, relations with the Balkan states remained strained due to their fear of Bulgarian revisionism and the Bulgarian public's negative opinion of the country's former allies. A friendly gesture was also made when Mikhail Madzarov, Dimitar Stanchev and Radko Dmitriev were appointed ambassadors to London, Paris and St. Petersburg. This showed that the Liberal government was not ready to burn its bridges to the Entente powers. The Central Powers, on the other hand, were not yet willing to step in an open alliance with Bulgaria, as this would have alienated the other Balkan countries that Germany and Austria-Hungary had interest in, particularly Romania and Greece. The most active Entente power in the Balkans was Russia, which sought to limit Austro-Hungarian influence in the area by creating a new Balkan League that was to include Serbia, Montenegro and possibly Romania and Bulgaria. The latter was not in the center of these plans. Though its participation was viewed as attractive enough, Russian diplomacy spent much more time and effort courting Romania, which achieved little practical results but stirred negative emotions and further alienated Bulgaria. Hints towards Serbia that it should make at least minor concessions to Bulgaria only met its stubborn resistance, which was supported by Greece. In the Foreign Minister Sazonov decided that the only way to influence Bulgaria without harming Russian relations with its neighbors was through financial pressure on the Radoslavov government and its deposition by a pro-Entente government. France and the United Kingdom were willing to let Russia deal with Bulgaria and preferred not to intervene directly. Prime Minister Radoslavov, on the other hand, partially sought the support of the UK through the Bulgarian representative in St. Petersburg, General Dmitriev, who asked the British ambassador to the Empire to mediate the relationship between Bulgaria and Russia. George Buchanan politely refused any involvement but hinted to Sazonov that he should not risk curtailing Entente influence in Sofia by assuming the hard line toward Bulgaria. The most important task that faced the Radoslavov government in its foreign policy following the Treaty of Bucharest was to secure a loan that could provide the funds needed to pay the financial cost of the Balkan Wars, develop the new territories and continue paying a government debt of over 700 million golden leva. The difficult task was entrusted to the Foreign Minister Nikola Genadiev and the Finance Minister Dimitar Tonchev, who were first dispatched to France, which held a considerable chunk of the Bulgarian public debt and from which Bulgaria had usually obtained loans before the Balkan Wars. The French refused due to Russian pressure. Despite that, the Bulgarian representatives were ready to accept certain unfavorable conditions and that French banks were simultaneously granting loans to Serbia, Greece, Romania and the Ottoman Empire. In October, Tonchev managed to secure a short-term loan of 30 million leva from Austrian banks, but the sum was far from sufficient. In February, the Bulgarians again turned to France and were met with unacceptable conditions. In early 1914, Tonchev, assisted by the German and Austro-Hungarian representatives in Sofia, Gustav Michaels and Count Adam Tarnowski von Tarnow, opened negotiations with the German Diskontogesellschaft Bank. Russia and France were aware of the talks but initially dismissed the possibility of their successful conclusion. It was only in April, when the Bulgarian and German representatives had reached an understanding on the basic points of the loan, that the Entente realized that through its hard line it had pushed Bulgaria toward a serious commitment to the Central Powers. The Russian ambassador to Sofia, Savinsky, urged the Bulgarian parliamentary opposition to resist the Radoslavov government's intention and personally met with Tsar Ferdinand, whom he promised a French loan in exchange for the removal of Radoslavov. An offer for 500 million from the French Banque Perrier was also made. Entente efforts, however, came too late and failed to change Bulgarian intentions. In July 1914, a consortium of German banks led by the Diskontogesellschaft granted the 500 million golden leva loan to Bulgaria under harsh conditions. The sum would be received in 2 installments of 250 million each and had to be repaid within 50 years with an annual interest of 5%. The Bulgarians were obliged to grant the German consortium the contract for the construction of a new port in Porto Lagos and a railway leading to it. The Germans were also to take over the running of the state mines in Pernik and Barbovdol. The government managed to pass the loan through a vote in Parliament despite furious opposition. The debate took place among numerous fist-fights. The Prime Minister was seen to wave a revolver above his head. The government claimed the loan had been approved by show of hands. The loan agreement was a heavy defeat for Russian and French diplomacy, whose attention was also diverted by the July crisis. At this point, it did not yield a firm commitment by Tsar Ferdinand in Bulgaria to the cause of the Central Powers.